So I was going through some older Stefan Molyneux videos recently, because I was bored. I was looking for something to watch, and I stumbled across one of the videos that I remember I loved because it was just so hilarious and embarrassing. It was a caller that called into Stefan's show to discuss communism. Funnily enough, his actual question that he called in for really had nothing to do with communism, but he just completely ignored the question he asked and went to a different topic. But anyway, at some point in the video, he says that the Soviet Union wasn't real communism. This statement is met with some well-deserved confusion from Stefan Molyneux, being like, what are you talking about? Soviet Russia was as communist as you could get next to Mao's China. And the caller uses the, framework, or he uses the standard, I guess you could call it. He uses the standard that since the Soviet Union didn't reach the goal that Marx said should have been reached, or that Marxist philosophers said should have been reached by implementing communist policies, since the Soviet Union didn't reach that goal, it wasn't communist. So I made this simple diagram to try to lay out what his logical thinking is, his logical pattern, and his standard for communism. And I'm going to take his framework of logic that he applies to what is and what is not a communist nation, and I'm going to take that and I'm going to apply it to something else to see if that is logically consistent or see if it holds up. So this is my diagram. It starts off with the concept, leads to the implementation of that concept, and then there is the goal. And I'm going to explain this framework that he uses in the communist way. So the concept. Communism is an ideology with presuppositions about economics, classes, and morality. Skipping to the goal. The goal of communism is to see its presuppositions and ideas be acted out in the real world. Implementation. The method of implementation would be to enact policies or perform actions that reflect the presuppositions and ideas of communism. So if the concept is communism, the graph would look like this. Communism, then implementation, which would be to eliminate private property, socialize farming, etc., which is what Stalin did. And then the implementation leads to the supposed goal, which is a stateless, egalitarian, workers' collective society. Now remember, according to this particular communist's logic, if the goal presupposed by communist philosophers is not reached, then the nation or society is not communist. Now let's apply that same standard to a different concept and see how that turns out. For our comparative concept, I am choosing weightlifting. So in this scenario, the concept is weightlifting. Weightlifting is a sect of physical fitness that has presuppositions about biology, anatomy, etc. Now, the goal. The goal of weightlifting is to see its presuppositions and ideas be acted out in the real world and to the benefit of its practitioners. The implementation would be to perform actions that reflect the presuppositions and ideas of weightlifting. So it is given the same standard as the communist concept. So for implementation, you would have, doing supersets and compound sets using weights or different weightlifting exercises that would reflect the presuppositions of weightlifting. And then the goal, improving health in a particular way, because there are different goals of weightlifting, either muscular endurance, muscular strength, muscular size, injury prevention, etc. Just as there are multiple goals of communism. So applying the same logical standard of the communist graph to the weightlifting graph, someone who lifts weights by implementing the presuppositions of weightlifting, that is what lifting weights would be. If you lift weights, but you don't reach the goal of weightlifting, then you aren't weightlifting. There's obviously a logical problem here. If you are picking up weights and moving them up and down, then you are by definition weightlifting. If you are doing curls, you are by definition a weightlifter. But if by doing that you don't reach the goal of weightlifting, which is to improve your health, then you aren't a weightlifter. It's a paradox. If you are actively lifting weights, then you are a weightlifter. You can't lift weights and not be a weightlifter. It is definitionally impossible. So if we can't use that communist standard of what a communist nation is, what standard should we use to define what is a communist nation or society? Well, we would first start with the concept. The first step to being a communist is accepting the ideas of communism. And clearly this was the case in the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union under Stalin had the Congress of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. Stalin was friends with Lenin, who was a devout Marxist communist. The accepting of the concept is clearly there. Then next, we would look at implementation. And if you implement policies or perform actions that are consistent with the presuppositions and ideas of the concept, then you are clearly a communist, or you are clearly a communist nation. And that is the standard you use to decide what is a communist nation or not. The concept, see if the concept is there, and then the implementation that reflects the ideas of that concept. That is the standard. The perceived goal of the texts or the concept doesn't matter. If Karl Marx wrote in the Communist Manifesto that implementing the policies of communists and accepting all of these presuppositions would make a unicorn grow out of the ground, if Stalin did that to make a unicorn grow out of the ground and it didn't, it doesn't mean he wasn't communist. The goal doesn't matter. It's the concept and the implementation that is reflective of those concepts, like I've said. My standard also deals with this particular communist's defense, which is that just because someone calls themselves communist or the nation calls themselves communist, that doesn't mean it's true. He says this by referring to North Korea, saying, oh, North Korea is the People's Democratic Republic of North Korea, but it's not a republic, it is a despotic dictatorship. My standard refutes this test because a part of my standard is the implementation. So if North Korea's policies or actions that it performs does not reflect a democratic republic, then it clearly is not, because it's a dictatorship. The reason this is not the same thing as the USSR calling itself communist is because the implementation was based off of the communist philosophy. Kim Jong-un's implementation does not reflect democratic republic ideals. So in short, I used this communist's logic against him, and I believe I disproved his defense that the USSR was not communist. And it's really just an attempt by most socialists and communists to deflect blame off of their ideas. They can say, oh no, that wasn't real communism, my communism is better. Because no matter how many people die under communism, there's always someone else who comes along and says, oh, that wasn't real communism, they didn't do it right, I'll do it right. And then someone else comes along and after you failed, and they say, oh, he didn't do it right, I'll do it right, and it's just a cycle of that. So I think that's it. I'm pretty sure I've covered everything I need to that I can think of. Hope you liked it. Please comment down below if you watched this. If you have any criticisms, what you think I got wrong. And I'll see you in the next video.